You know that feeling, staring at just, well, a mountain of articles, reports, notes, all demanding attention, all promising insight, but mostly just overwhelming you.
Oh, absolutely. Information overload is real. It's like, where do you even start trying to distill the essence?
Exactly. You scroll, you skim, trying to find that golden thread, but it feels like searching for a needle in a digital haystack.
Hmm.
It's a modern problem, right? So much information, but understanding, that's harder.
It really is. The sheer volume can be paralyzing. Making sense of it, truly synthesizing it, that takes serious effort.
Couldn't agree more. And that right there is why we created the deep dive.
Yeah.
Think of us as your guides through that information jungle. We do the heavy lifting, extract the vital insights, connect the dots.
So you get the shortcut to being genuinely well-informed without drowning in the raw data. Maybe even with a few surprising facts along the way.
Precisely. And today, we're diving deep into a topic that's honestly fascinating and incredibly important for understanding how the world works: development administration.
Yeah, and this isn't just dry government mechanics. It's much bigger. It's about how societies actually transform.
How they change economically, socially, politically, especially in nations striving for growth, for progress. We're talking about the nuts and bolts of societal advancement.
It's the blueprint, or maybe the constantly evolving blueprint, for how nations try to move forward. And our sources for this, they're pretty comprehensive.
We really are. We've got everything from foundational definitions, historical shifts, economic theories, the impact of global trends like liberalization.
And even a deep look at a really powerful ground-up approach, women's empowerment and self-help groups.
So our mission today, it's ambitious but clear. We want to unpack what development administration actually means. How do we even get to our current understanding? It wasn't always like this.
Right. We'll look at how it's evolved, that crucial dance between state and market forces, who leads, who follows, how they interact, or sometimes clash.
We'll definitely explore the impact, the often turbulent impact of liberalization, privatization, and globalization, the whole LPG phenomenon. How did that change the game for administration?
And importantly, we'll zoom in on that grassroots power, women's empowerment, and the self-help group movement, how change can really bubble up from the community level.
Our goal is simple. For you, listening right now, to walk away with a clear, nuanced grasp of this field, to get why some nations seem to thrive while others struggle, and what it really takes to drive progress. Sound good?
Let's dive in.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Development administration. It wasn't just, always there. It popped up at a specific time for a specific reason.
Exactly. Its emergence is really tied to the post-World War II era. It crystallized specifically for those newly independent developing countries in Asia, Africa, Latin America.
Right, nations trying to build themselves up, often from scratch after colonialism.
Precisely. It was seen as this new, change-driven and positive perspective, almost a tailored approach to administration for nations on a mission to develop.
So it's fundamentally different from just, traditional public administration. How so?
Big difference. Traditional public administration often focuses more on, say, maintaining order, collecting taxes, keeping the existing machinery running smoothly. Status quo, basically.
Okay.
Development administration, though, it's about government in dynamic action. Its whole purpose is to proactively bring about progressive change, social, economic, political change. It's not about maintaining, it's about building.
Building, transforming. So it's looking at the deeper structures, not just surface level stuff.
Absolutely. It's deeply concerned with the systems, the structures, making sure the whole social and political system is geared towards the path of development.
This means
It means concrete, well-organized, integrated, and goal-directed efforts, aimed squarely at socioeconomic progress and, crucially, the welfare of the people. It directly takes on challenges like poverty, illiteracy, low production, seeing them as obstacles to be actively overcome.
that sounds incredibly proactive, almost like social engineering in a way.
Yeah.
So what are its defining features? What makes it pick?
Well, George F. Gantt laid out some really useful characteristics. First off, it's fundamentally goal-oriented.
Meaning specific targets.
Exactly. Action-specific, goal-specific, result-specific programs. It's about achieving targeted socioeconomic goals, not just activity for activity's sake, but aiming for concrete outcomes.
Makes sense. If you're aiming for goals, you're inherently trying to change things.
Precisely. Which leads to the second point. It's profoundly change-oriented. Its whole reason for being is to stimulate, to facilitate definite programs for progress. Totally different from the often static nature of traditional admin. It's about moving the needle.
And to move that needle, especially on big national projects, you'd need serious dedication.
Absolutely. That's the commitment-oriented aspect. It requires full commitment from the administrative machinery, top to bottom, to see projects through, hit deadlines, all for that holistic national development. Without that buy-in, plans just gather dust.
Right. And developing countries face unique challenges, so you can't just copy-paste solutions. You need new ideas.
Which brings us to creativity and innovativeness. And this isn't just jargon, it's the real ability to develop new ideas, new ways of doing things, applying novel structures, procedures, methods, policies, all to hit those developmental goals, often with very limited resources. Ingenuity is key.
So it's not just fixing one thing, like the economy, but looking at the whole picture.
Ideally, yes, it aims for holistic all-round development, comprehensive progress, aligning all those goals, economic, social, political, with public welfare, balanced growth, leaving no crucial area behind.
And it sounds like there's a sense of urgency, too, like results matter, and they matter now.
Definitely. It's time-bound accountability and social realities oriented. There's a focus on getting programs done quickly within definite timeframes. Accountability for results is huge.
And connected to the ground.
Critically, it has to be responsive, flexible, connected to social realities at local and grassroots levels. You can't impose solutions from an ivory tower. You need to understand diverse local needs.
And to make all this happen, the system itself needs to be strong enough.
That's capacity building. Planning changes to strengthen the administration itself, improving skills, removing environmental or cultural hurdles that might block progress, building the engine from within.
And ultimately, it's about fairness, equality, making sure development benefits everyone.
That's the aspiration. It's about modernization, institution building, and democratization, building a just, equal social and political order, ensuring the benefits actually show a trickle-down effect, reaching the most vulnerable, not just enriching the few.
That paints a really vivid picture. Now, several key thinkers shaped this field. Let's talk about some of them. Merle Feinsod, for instance, back in '63.
Feinsod was pivotal. He basically saw development administration as the carrier of innovative values, the engine for modernization in these emerging nations.
So his focus was on creating the right government machinery.
Yes. He argued they needed new machinery specifically for planning economic growth, mobilizing resources, a real break from older, maybe colonial administrative models. It was about building the capacity to transform.
Okay. And Edward Widener, around the same time. Did he have a different take?
Widener also saw it as an action-oriented, goal-oriented administrative system guiding progress. But what's really interesting about Widener is his emphasis on context. He stressed the importance of environmental factors and cultural factors in particular.
So administration doesn't happen in a vacuum.
Exactly. He recognized that culture deeply shapes how administration works, how effective it can be in bringing about change and innovation. You have to tailor it to the specific context.
That's a really crucial point. What about John Montgomery in '66?
Yeah.
More practical.
Montgomery was very focused on the doing. He defined it as carrying out planned change in the economy, agriculture, industry, infrastructure, and social services, like education and health. More about the direct implementation of development projects in specific sectors. Less theory, more how-to.
Got it. And then Fred W. Riggs, he's a big name. What was his angle and were there critiques?
Riggs, writing in 1970, gave a broader definition. Organized efforts to carry out programs or projects thought to serve developmental objectives. He's famous for his theoretical models, like the Sala model describing admin in transitional societies.
But maybe less grounded in practice.
That was the critique, sometimes, that he didn't emphasize structural problems or examine operational issues empirically as much. His work was hugely influential theoretically, but perhaps less focused on the messy details of making things work on the ground in diverse places.
Interesting. And finally, George F. Gantt, whose characteristics we just discussed.
Yeah.
How did he tie it all together?
Gantt, in '79, described it as that complex of agencies, management systems, and processes governments use to achieve development goals. He really highlighted its flexible and innovative dimension, the need to constantly design new methods, policies, and plans to get results efficiently, effectively, often with scarce resources. He brought together the structure and the dynamism.
It's clear the idea of development administration evolved. And speaking of evolution, the way we actually measure development also changed dramatically, didn't it?
Yeah.
It wasn't always about human well-being.
Oh, absolutely. That's a critical shift. For a long time, maybe the 50s, early 60s, development was basically seen as synonymous with economic growth.
Just the numbers going up.
Pretty much. The main measure was often the basic needs approach, focusing on a sustained increase in real per capita GNP. The core belief was the trickle-down effect. If the economy grows, wealth will eventually reach everyone.
Yeah, the infamous trickle-down, which often didn't quite trickle down, did it?
More like a trickle-up, some would say. In many developing countries, that trickle-down effect simply failed to bring its effect. Economic growth happened, yes, but it didn't automatically translate into less poverty or better lives for the majority. Growth wasn't enough.
So people realized we needed a broader view.
Exactly. By the late 60s, early 70s, the thinking shifted towards growth with redistribution. It wasn't enough for the pie to get bigger, it had to be shared more fairly.
And that's when we got things like the Human Development Index.
Precisely. The UN introduced the Human Development Index, HDI, which was revolutionary. It looked beyond just income to include health and education metrics. It recognized development was multidimensional.
A much more holistic view. And Amartya Sen took this even further.
He did, profoundly so. Sen's capability approach, articulated around 1999, redefined development itself. He argued it's fundamentally about the expansion of freedoms.
Oh, freedoms, like political freedom.
Those too, but also the freedom to live the kind of life a person values. He saw freedoms as both the main goal of development and the principal means to achieve it.
So it's not just about having money, but about what you can do or be with your life.
Exactly. He talked about capability deprivation, people being unfree, not just because of low income, but because they lack basic capabilities like being healthy or educated. His focus shifted everything towards human life and dignity, empowerment, and capacity building. Quality of life, education, health, human rights, these became central to the meaning of development.
That's a huge shift, from just GDP figures to empowering individuals to live fulfilling lives, a much richer understanding. Okay, so we have this evolved understanding of development administration, focused now on human capabilities. Let's get into the dynamics of who drives this, the state versus the market. Historically, the state was king, right?
Absolutely. In that immediate post-WWII period, the overwhelming consensus was state-led development. The state was seen as the primary, almost the only engine capable of driving national progress.
What fueled that belief so strongly?
Several big things converged. You had the Soviet Union model, a state-controlled economy, seemingly achieving rapid industrialization. Then the Great Depression hit hard, seen by many as a massive failure of unregulated markets.
So markets looked risky, the state looked like the stabilizing force.
Exactly. Plus, you had the rise of welfare states in the West and socialist countries elsewhere, all emphasizing strong state planning for public welfare and economic management. The core idea was the state is indispensable for mobilizing resources, guiding investment, ensuring development happens.
Leading to bigger governments, more state control.
Definitely. There was a steady enlargement of the role and size of government right up until the 1980s. The state was firmly in the driver's seat.
But then the 80s happened. A major U-turn, it seems. The market starts its comeback tour, and the state's role gets seriously questioned. What caused that shift?
It was a perfect storm, really, driven by globalization, liberalization, privatization. The LPG forces we'll dig into more. Several factors chipped away at the state-led model.
Like the fall of the Berlin Wall, the collapse of the Soviet bloc?
That was huge, psychologically and politically. It seemed to show the failure of centrally planned economies on a grand scale. At the same time, in many developing countries, people were frustrated. State-run services, health, education, even basic law and order often weren't delivering effectively. Faith in state capacity dwindled.
And governments were running out of money.
Fiscal crises were hitting hard. Developed nations struggled with the cost of the welfare state. Developing countries often faced huge losses from inefficient, sometimes corrupt state-owned enterprises. They were draining budgets, not driving growth.
But wasn't there also evidence that a different approach could work? The Asian tigers?
Yes, the success of the East Asian tigers, Hong Kong, Singapore, South Korea, Taiwan, was a powerful counterexample. They achieved incredible growth with a different model, a state that was strategic, facilitative, but limited. It created a stable framework for markets to thrive, intervening selectively, smartly, not controlling everything.
So this all fed into the idea of rolling back the state. Less government.
Precisely. You had Thatcher in the UK, Reagan in the US, championing deregulation, privatization, market-oriented reforms. The philosophy became government by the market.
The belief being the market is just inherently better.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
Better at allocating resources, meeting needs efficiently. So the prescription was government should do less, reduce its scope, privatize services, operate more like a business itself.
It sounds like a real pendulum swing, from all state to all market. But is it really that black and white? Are they totally separate forces?
That's the crucial point. While the rhetoric was often stark, the reality and the more sophisticated understanding now is that they're deeply interdependent. Economies can hardly exist without essential elements of a state and markets. They're inseparable and necessary.
So you need both.
You absolutely need both. A strong market needs a strong, legitimate state to set the rules, enforce contracts. A modern state relies on a dynamic market for wealth creation. They're two pillars of the modern world.
The World Bank actually said something along those lines, didn't they?
Yeah.
About finding the right balance.
They did. Their 1991 report put it really well. Government needs to do less in those areas where markets work reasonably well. At the same time, governments need to do more in those areas where markets alone cannot be relied upon. It's about smart division of labor, not ideological warfare.
Okay, so why are markets generally preferred for certain things? What's their magic?
Well, competitive markets, when they work well, are powerful engines for innovation, efficiency, and progress. Competition drives entrepreneurship, pushes technological boundaries, ensures goods and services are produced and distributed effectively. Voluntary exchange between buyers and sellers, underpinned by clear rules, can be incredibly dynamic.
But even with that dynamism, the state still has core jobs only it can do.
Absolutely essential jobs. Upholding property rights, enforcing contracts through police, courts, that's the bedrock. Without that, markets collapse into chaos. Plus, the state has the unique power for large-scale resource mobilization, providing essential public goods and influencing distribution for societal goals like equity.
Okay, so markets are great, but not perfect. We hear about market failures. What does that actually mean? When does the magic fail?
Market failure happens when the free market, left alone, fails to deliver socially optimum outcomes. Basically, the pursuit of private gain doesn't lead to the best result for society as a whole. Resource allocation becomes inefficient.
Can you give us an example?
The classic one is public goods. Think national defense, or clean air, or even those police and courts we just mentioned. These are things that are non-rival. One person using them doesn't stop others, and non-excludable. It's hard to stop people benefiting even if they don't pay.
The free rider problem.
Exactly. Because people can benefit without paying, private companies have little incentive to provide these goods. So the market undersupplies them or doesn't supply them at all. That's a clear failure.
What about the opposite? When market activity creates negative outcomes, public bads.
Good point. Pollution is a prime example. A factory produces goods, private good, but pollutes the air or water. Public bad or negative externality. The cost of that pollution isn't paid by the factory or the consumer directly, it's borne by society. The market, unregulated, produces too much pollution.
So government steps in, like with emission standards.
Right. Things like India's BSVI norms for vehicles force companies to internalize that external cost, correcting the market failure.
Okay, what about information? Does the market always handle that perfectly?
Not at all. Information asymmetries are another common failure. This is when one side of a transaction knows much more than the other. Think buying a used car, or complex financial products, or even getting medical advice.
The seller knows the potential problems. The buyer doesn't.
Precisely. This imbalance can lead to bad decisions, exploitation, or markets simply not functioning well. That's why we have regulations requiring disclosure, setting standards for doctors or financial advisors trying to level that information playing field.
So markets definitely have their blind spots. But governments aren't perfect either, are they? They can fail too. What does government failure look like?
Absolutely. Governments can fail just as spectacularly. One issue is the monopoly and expansion incentive. Unlike private firms facing competition, governments have unique coercive powers and sometimes an incentive to grow larger, not necessarily for efficiency, but for power, prestige, bureaucratic influence.
Bureaucrats wanting bigger budgets, more staff.
That's part of it, often called budget maximization. Bureaucrats might naturally try to maximize their department's budget for career advancement or status. This can lead to an oversupply of unnecessary public goods, think vanity projects, while critical, less visible public goods get underfunded. Resources get misallocated based on internal incentives, not public need.
And regulations themselves meant to fix market failures can get twisted.
Yes, that's regulatory capture and rent-seeking. Regulations can be influenced or captured by the very industries they're supposed to regulate or by powerful officials. These groups then use the rules to gain unfair advantages or institutional rents, excess profits created by the regulation itself, not by market efficiency.
Like lobbying for rules that only benefit your company.
Exactly. Or the revolving door, where regulators later go work for the industry they regulated. It breeds corruption, inefficiency, and undermines public trust.
And simple politics can get in the way too, right?
Definitely. Political interference and resistance to change are huge factors. Decisions get made for short-term political gain, not long-term development. Patronage appointments undermine professionalism, and entrenched bureaucracies can simply resist needed reforms or innovations because it threatens their routines or power. Inertia can be a powerful force hindering development.
So it's this complex reality. Neither state nor market is flawless. Both have strengths, both have weaknesses. It's about finding that tricky balance.
It really is, and that sets the stage perfectly for understanding the impact of LPG, liberalization, privatization, globalization, which massively reshaped that very balance.
Right, let's dive into that LPG triumvirate. These forces really swept the globe from the 80s and 90s onwards, fundamentally changing the rules of the game for development administration.
They absolutely did. LPG emerged as this dominant global philosophy, heavily pushed by neoliberal ideas, the public choice school, and influential political movements like Thatcherism and Reaganomics. It spread rapidly from the US and UK to many other countries, including India in the early 90s.
So let's break them down. Liberalization, what's the core idea there?
Liberalization is essentially about opening things up, removing or reducing restrictions on the free flow of goods, services, capital. Think lowering tariffs, getting rid of complicated import licenses, quotas, basically dismantling barriers to trade and investment, both internationally and domestically, letting market forces operate more freely.
Okay. And privatization, selling off state-owned stuff.
That's the most visible part, yes. Privatization is the transfer of ownership or control of businesses, industries, or services from the public sector to the private sector. This could be selling off state-owned companies like Air India, or disinvestment, selling partial stakes, or even contracting out public services to private firms instead of the government doing it directly.
Got it. And then globalization, the big one. How do we define that concisely?
Globalization is the broadest concept. It's about the increasing interconnectedness of the world, the global spread of goods, services, technology, ideas, and processes. The UN talks about the free movement of trade, people, capital, technology, even culture across borders. The OECD called it a shift from distinct national economies to a global economy. Production, finance, ideas, all becoming more internationalized.
So this huge wave of LPG hits. What was the impact on public administration, especially in developing nations? It sounds like it would have been a mixed bag.
Definitely mixed. On one hand, globalization undeniably spurred an unprecedented expansion of trade, finance, investment, huge technological leaps, rising consumer demands, lots of new opportunities.
The flip side.
The flip side included, well, serious economic crises in some places, a feeling that the state was being weakened in its traditional roles, the rapid spread of market values sometimes overriding other concerns, and often a concentration of wealth. This led to worries about increasing poverty, inequality, and social tensions, what some called a distorted development process.
So public administration itself had to change fundamentally to cope.
It absolutely had to undergo a major administrative transition, from managing planned economies to navigating market forces, integrating with the global system. This meant governments needed new skills, new capabilities within their bureaucracies, a whole new mindset, really adapting to a faster, more interconnected world.
Jamil Drisad pointed out some specific new challenges back in 2004. Do those still hold up?
They really do. He highlighted the growing need for sophisticated negotiation skills between states in this more complex world. He also noted the bureaucracy's role shifting from managing everything directly to facilitating economic activity, creating an enabling environment. Think of India's Mission Karmayogi trying to make civil servants more proactive facilitators.
So less direct control, more setting the stage.
Exactly. Also, a much stronger focus on performance, results-oriented management, making public entities more professional and competitive. A need for real managerial leadership, sensitivity to human rights and diversity. The rise of e-government, like India's Digital India mission, was another huge shift, he noted. And finally, the need for a comparative perspective, learning from different administrative systems globally.
And Ali Farazmand also saw this mix of outcomes.
Yes. Farazmand in '99 noted positive shifts like more focus on citizens' rights, accountability, ethics. But he also warned about the shrinking of public space for democratic input, potential human rights issues, and the commodification of citizens, treating people more like consumers than citizens. A real tension there.
This points to a fundamental change in what the state is or what it's supposed to do, from welfare provider to something else.
Precisely. The traditional welfare state model, where the government took direct responsibility for a lot of public services and safety nets, came under pressure. Globalization and the market-based approach pushed towards the competition state.
The competition state, meaning
Meaning, the state's main job shifted towards making the national economy competitive on the global stage. This was part of that rollback of the state deregulation market reforms. Some even worried about the rise of the corporate state, where government starts to operate more like a private corporation, potentially shrinking the space for public deliberation.
which created a need for a different kind of state role, the regulator.
Exactly. As the state did less direct provision, it had to step up as the regulatory state, setting the rules of the game, ensuring efficiency, defining service standards, tackling market distortions, providing legal frameworks, protecting stakeholders, consumers, workers, investors, becoming the referee.
Osborne and Gabler's Reinventing Government seems to capture this perfectly. The state as a catalyst, not the sole actor.
It really does. Their 1992 book argued governments should focus on steering, not rowing.
Yeah.
Restructuring markets by setting rules, ensuring information flows, maybe augmenting demand, catalyzing private action, creating market institutions, sharing risks smartly, regulating through incentives, not just commands, intelligent intervention.
Like the governed market idea, where the state still guides things subtly.
Yes, using tools like subsidies, credit controls, maybe export controls, like on basmati rice recently in India, things the market wouldn't do on its own, but which serve a national purpose. And the World Bank chimed in, too, stressing that development requires good governance. You need effective, transparent, accountable institutions for a market economy to deliver sustainable growth.
This sounds an awful lot like the philosophy behind New Public Management, NPM. What exactly was NPM aiming for?
NPM was exactly that, a reform model trying to make public administration more efficient, more business-like, more results-focused. It swept through many countries under different names, reinventing government, re-engineering, but the core ideas were similar.
And what were those core ideas in practice? How did it change how government worked, according to someone like Rosenblum?
Rosenblum highlighted key parameters. A laser focus on results, not just process. Introducing market principles like competition, contracting out, a customer-driven approach, government steering, not rowing, relying more on third parties, NGOs, private firms, for delivery, deregulation to increase flexibility, empowering employees, shifting the culture towards being flexible, innovative, entrepreneurial, away from rigid rules.
So NPM was really the practical toolkit for building that competition state.
You could definitely see it that way. It provided the methods and the mindset change.
Okay, NPM and LPG promised a lot, efficiency, growth, but it wasn't all smooth sailing. What were the major criticisms, the pushback, especially from the developing world?
Oh, the criticisms were substantial. A big one was the high cost of privatization. Often state assets were sold off cheaply. Accusations flew about deals like Air India initially. Peter Self noted it often led to increased unemployment, especially for older workers, hitting welfare budgets. Plus, a loss of worker morale and often increased economic inequality, corporate profits up, wages stagnant or down.
And it wasn't corruption a big issue, especially with contracting out?
Huge issue. Contracting out while aiming for efficiency opened up massive new avenues for corruption and mismanagement. It became incredibly hard and costly for governments to properly monitor private contractors' performance and ethics.
And the state itself seemed to shrink, leading to new power dynamics.
Yes, this idea of destatization. The state's direct role diminished relative to non-state actors, NGOs, CSOs, powerful corporations. While collaboration can be good, it also raised concerns about conflict of interests, with powerful lobbies or even some international NGOs potentially pushing their own agendas, sometimes hindering national development priorities.
Did the quality of services actually improve, or was it just about cutting costs?
That was a major complaint. Often, while costs might have been cut, the quality of services didn't improve or even declined, especially in developing countries. The focus on the bottom line sometimes ignored accessibility and actual effectiveness for citizens.
I recall reading about MNCs and resource loot. What was that argument?
Scholars like Farsmand and Bhattacharya argued that some multinational corporations engaged in resource loot, exploiting natural resources, biotech, intellectual property from developing nations at low cost, and then selling expensive finished products back to them. an extractive cycle, they argued.
And what about things like user fees for public services? Fair.
Often not. The push for user fees clashed directly with principles of equity and ability to pay. In poorer countries, making people pay directly for essential services like healthcare or education could deepen inequalities and cause real hardship and discontent.
And powerful international bodies were pushing these reforms hard, sometimes ignoring local realities.
Absolutely. The World Bank, IMF, major business lobbies exerted significant external pressures, pushing for rapid tariff cuts, subsidy removals, sometimes overriding local regulations or concerns about things like food security or farmer livelihoods. Developing countries often felt pressured into policies that didn't fit their context.
It sounds like many places just weren't ready for such a rapid shift. They lacked the foundations.
That's a key critique. Many developing countries lacked the prerequisites: strong institutions, educated workforce, IT infrastructure for marketization to work smoothly. So, despite the hype and pressure, the results were often unsatisfactory. The promised gains in efficiency or poverty reduction didn't always materialize.
Which must have led to pushback from ordinary people.
Definitely. You saw rising counter-pressures from citizens demanding more participation, transparency, social justice, a widespread feeling that globalization in that initial wave benefited elites, while the majority were left behind or worse off.
Joseph Stiglitz had a pretty stark warning about this trajectory.
He did. Stiglitz warned in 2002 that if globalization kept going that way, failing to learn from mistakes, it would create poverty and instability, not just promote development. The dominant view from the developing world became, this process needs to be actively collaborative, serving shared, equitable goals, not just powerful interests.
So given all that pushback, how did the model adapt? Did a more pragmatic version of neoliberalism emerge?
Yes, I think it had to. While figures like Tony Blair argued globalization was irreversible, the need for adaptation became clear. Outright rejection wasn't feasible, but refinement was essential.
So not throwing out market ideas entirely, but maybe balancing them better.
Exactly. The strict focus on market forces got supplemented by renewed accent on equity, participation, human rights, and partnership. The pragmatic model still favored market orientation, but crucially acknowledged the need for public investment in people, health, education, infrastructure, safety nets, democratic institutions, rule of law. Markets need a solid foundation.
Making it more holistic.
Yes, market-based, but also holistic, political, social dimensions, synergistic, they reinforce each other, and complex, requiring effective, capable states, not just absent ones.
What does Stiglitz recommend for this more balanced approach?
Stiglitz argued for using more policy tools to aim for sustainable, egalitarian, democratic development. Government has a crucial role as a referee, ensuring fair play, promoting competition, and encouraging the private sector to help provide public goods, shared responsibility.
So what lessons did developing countries take away from the LPG roller coaster?
Key lessons emerged. A huge one was appreciating indigenous local systems. Adapting global trends, yes, but grounding them in local realities. India's 73rd, 74th Amendments empowering local government are an example. Globalization needs to empower locally to be sustainable and equitable.
And good governance became the mantra.
Absolutely central. Concepts like minimum government, maximum governance, e-governance initiatives in India, all aimed at fostering democracy, fairness, equity, protecting the poor, trying to achieve globalization with a human face.
Stiglitz also talked about the challenge of global governance without a global government. What did he mean by that accountability gap?
That's a critical point. He called for a more humane, effective, and equitable globalization, stressing transparency, fairness, social justice, accountability. The problem is, huge decisions affecting billions are made by global institutions, World Bank, IMF, WTO, but who holds them accountable? There's no single democratic world government. It creates a democratic deficit at the global level.
So out of all this, a different vision for public administration emerged, beyond just market efficiency.
Yes, leading to ideas like the new public service, proposed by the Denharts around 2000. They argued efficiency and productivity are important, but must sit within the larger context of democracy, community, public interest.
Shifting the focus back to people.
Exactly. Focus on serving the citizens, thinking strategically but acting democratically, valuing citizenship over mere entrepreneurialism, and being accountable not just to the market, but to law, community values, citizens, ethics, public purpose first.
That feels like a much more grounded, human-centered way forward for development administration. Okay, that's a great overview of the big theories and shifts. Now let's pivot to something really concrete, a powerful grassroots approach, the self-help group, or SHG, movement, especially when it's women-led. But first, why is women's empowerment so critical? What are the specific hurdles they face that make movements like SHGs so necessary?
Understanding those hurdles is crucial because they are so deep and wide-ranging. They hit women economically, socially, psychologically, politically. It's systemic.
And let's start with the economic side. What barriers do women typically encounter?
Economically, in many developing areas, women are hit harder by poor infrastructure, illiteracy, low overall productivity, energy shortages, resource constraints, all impacting income. Specifically, they're often stuck in the informal sector, insecure jobs, no benefits. There's that persistent wage gap. And the lack of affordable childcare is a massive barrier to participating fully in the economy or starting businesses.
And the social insecurity issues are often quite stark.
Tragically so. Social discrimination starts early, female feticide, infanticide, son preference, dowry issues leading to those missing women statistics. Security-wise, crimes against women, domestic violence, harassment, assault are alarmingly high. This creates fear, restricts their mobility, limits their opportunities. High maternal mortality rates also point to deep systemic problems in healthcare and societal value.
And the psychological weight of all this. It must impact self-belief.
Immensely. Living in deeply patriarchal societies often leads to poor self-worth among women. Constant societal messages, stereotypes like the weaker sex, they erode confidence and ambition. It's a heady burden.
Politically, too, representation seems to lag way behind.
Far behind. Look at India's Lok Sabha, only about 14.4% women recently. There's often a lack of real political will to push through things like women's reservation bills, or they get passed but implementation stalls. So their voices aren't fully heard in the halls of power.
Are there examples elsewhere in the world tackling these issues creatively?
Yes, some interesting approaches. Georgia links political party funding to gender balance on electoral lists, a direct financial incentive. Japan's Womenomics pushes for tech training to ensure women aren't left behind digitally. And in Zambia, a simple tech change, a ground-level beehive, opened up beekeeping and economic independence to women who previously couldn't participate. Small changes can have big impacts.
Those are really practical examples. So focusing on India, what specific measures have been taken to try and empower women?
India's approach has been multi-pronged. Constitutionally, you have fundamental rights like Article 14, equality, and Article 23, against exploitation. Legally, many laws aim to protect women inheritance rights, dowry prohibition, PCP-NDT against sex selection, Domestic Violence Act, Maternity Benefit Act.
And the courts have played a role, too.
A very active one. Landmark judgments like the Vishaka Guidelines for Workplace Safety, the Shabano case on maintenance, the Triple Talaq judgment. The judiciary has often stepped in to interpret laws progressively and expand women's rights.
Plus numerous government schemes, I imagine.
Yes, a whole range. Beti Patao, Save and Educate Girls. Janani Suraksha Yojana, Safe Motherhood. eMahila Hat, online platform for entrepreneurs. Bank Sakhi Yojana, linking women to banking. And institutions like the National Commission for Women exist to advocate for their rights.
So with all these challenges and interventions, what's the core vision behind women-led development? It sounds like more than just helping women.
It's a fundamental shift, seeing women not as passive recipients, but as active architects of India's progress, moving from beneficiaries to agents of change, shaping development themselves.
Why is that shift so important? What difference does women-led make?
Several huge differences. First, the economic impact. Closing gender gaps boosts GDP significantly, potentially up to 27%, according to studies. Second, it creates more representative institutions. When women lead, policy choices change. Institutions better reflect diverse needs.
Leading to better policies overall.
Logically, yes. Better policymaking. Women understand their issues, often prioritize different things like family, community health, leading to more inclusive policies. It's also about moving from patriarchy to parity, dismantling unequal structures, aiming for genuine equality. And finally, achieving SDG 5, gender equality, is seen as key to unlocking progress on all other sustainable development goals. It's foundational.
That's a compelling case. So how do we make this happen? What are the practical strategies?
It needs action on many fronts. Widespread gender sensitization in laws, policies, services, strengthening legal frameworks, especially for the unorganized sector, and enforcing equal opportunity policies.
What about getting women into better jobs, owning assets?
Crucial. Encouraging women's participation in industry-setting targets, improving credit access, improving asset ownership, prioritizing land leases for women farmers, joint property registration, enhancing skills beyond traditional roles, promoting education to class 12, skilling in trades like electricians, plumbers, IT, and fundamentally ensuring mobility and safety, affordable housing, safe transport, fast-tracking justice for violence against women.
That covers a lot of systemic change. But what about empowering women at the community level directly? That's where SHGs come in.
Exactly. The self-help group movement is a brilliant example of grassroots, women-led development in action. An SHG is basically a small group, usually 10, 20 people, often women, from similar backgrounds. They pool savings, lend within the group, support each other. It's peer-controlled, built on trust.
And these are widespread in India.
Massively so. NABRA data shows over 10 million SHGs with bank links, covering over 120 million families. Their combined bank balance is around 7,000 crore rupees. And the key thing, about 90% of these SHGs are exclusively women. It's a huge women's movement.
Incredible scale. How did it start?
It started relatively small, with NABRD pioneering the idea of social intermediation back in 1987. They funded NGOs to promote SHGs, giving the concept official backing and initial momentum.
And then it became a formal national program.
Yes. Phase 1, 1987-92, was that initial NGO-led promotion. Phase 2, from 1992, saw the launch of the formal SHG bank linkage program. NABRD set guidelines allowing banks to lend directly to SHGs. It started slow, but really took off after 1999, with support from the RBI, governments, NGOs, and banks themselves embracing the model.
So what are the concrete benefits? How do SHGs actually help?
The benefits are multidimensional. Economically, they're huge for income generation and self-reliance through microfinance. They provide crucial financial inclusion, reducing dependence on loan sharks. Studies show SHG members use more formal loans, less informal ones, fostering financial discipline.
So economic empowerment is key. What about socially?
Socially, they provide a vital forum for women to discuss problems, build solidarity, gain confidence. They foster social inclusion, bringing marginalized women into community life, enabling participation in political and cultural affairs. It breaks isolation.
And they can influence local governance, too.
Yes, significant governance benefits. SHGs act as pressure groups, influencing local policies, improving how government schemes work. They can conduct social audits, reducing corruption, increasing transparency. They become community watchdogs and advocates.
Are there standout examples of successful SHG models?
Definitely. Kudumbashree in Kerala is probably the most famous, a massive state-supported project integrating microcredit, entrepreneurship, and empowerment. SIWA, Self-Employed Women's Association, founded by Ela Putt, is incredible, a trade union for informal women workers, focusing on income, nutrition, leadership, and smaller initiatives like Chaitanya in Pune have shown great success promoting SHGs organically.
It sounds like a fantastic model. But surely they face challenges, too. It can't be easy.
No, they face real hurdles. Economically, poor infrastructure in rural areas is still a problem. There are issues with non-performing assets, NPAs, if businesses aren't viable. Lack of market access is a major constraint. Surprisingly, many still rely on the informal sector for loans or supplies, even with bank linkage.
And the technology, the types of businesses they run.
Often rudimentary technology, limiting productivity, and many are stuck in the primary sector, agriculture, basic crafts, with low value addition, meaning income gains, while real might remain at subsistence levels. Breaking into higher value activities is tough.
What about social and cultural barriers?
Huge ones. The regional imbalance, mostly concentrated in the South, suggests cultural factors hindering spread elsewhere. Patriarchal attitudes limit women's mobility, decision-making power, or force them to leave groups after marriage. And intragroup politics can emerge, with stronger members sometimes dominating, undermining the collective spirit.
But from a governance perspective, policy issues.
Risk of politicization, where groups get co-opted or divided by local politics. Often lack of adequate capacity building training might be insufficient or poorly targeted. And inadequate monitoring means focusing on the number of groups formed, not necessarily the quality of their impact or internal functioning.
So given these challenges, what's the way forward to help SHGs reach their full potential?
It needs a supportive, facilitating approach. Policy support where the government acts as a promoter, creating an enabling environment, not controlling things too tightly. Promotion efforts need to focus on expanding the movement in underserved regions like North and East India, and also adapting it for urban areas. Incentivizing successful SHGs is also key.
How do you address those internal group issues?
That requires sensitive intervention. addressing differences through counseling, specific training programs to build trust, manage conflict, and ensure equitable participation. And finally, much more effective monitoring. Not just counting groups, but ensuring they function democratically, without discrimination based on caste or religion, truly achieving their developmental goals for all members.
It's a clear path, focusing on support, equity, and quality, not just quantity. A powerful vision for grassroots development. Wow, we have covered an incredible amount of territory today, from the very definition and evolution of development administrations.
Seeing it shift from just managing things to actively driving change, becoming that engine for modernization.
Right, and tracing how development itself changed meaning from purely economic growth, that often flawed trickle-down idea,
To Amartya Sen's profound capability approach, focusing on expanding human freedoms, dignity, and real-life choices.
we dug into that complex stance between the state and the market. The state's initial dominance, then the market's rise fueled by globalization.
And the critical realization that both can fail, and that they actually need each other, working in a complementary, if sometimes tense, partnership.
That we navigated the huge wave of liberalization, privatization, and globalization LPG. We unpacked what they meant, their mixed impacts.
Bringing opportunities, but also challenges like inequality, forcing public administration to transform to become more regulatory, more of a facilitator.
We touched on new public management, its push for efficiency, but also the crucial critiques, the costs, the potential for corruption, the demands for social justice.
Leading towards a more pragmatic neoliberalism, one that tries to balance market forces with equity, participation, human rights, and that vital concept of good governance.
And finally, we zoomed in on that powerful ground-up force,
Yeah.
women-led development through self-help groups, understanding the challenges women face.
And seeing how SHGs, despite their own hurdles, offer a tangible path towards economic independence, social empowerment, and even better local governance.
So you've really got, I hope, a comprehensive, nuanced picture now of how societies strive for progress, the complex forces at play, and the different strategies used. It's not simple, but it's vital stuff.
Absolutely. So as you think about everything we've discussed, here's a final thought to chew on. Given the inherent pitfalls in both pure state control and unfettered markets, and the often messy results of top-down global strategies, is there actually a single universal blueprint for sustainable development that truly empowers local communities and ensures fair progress for everyone?
Or perhaps, is searching for that one-size-fits-all blueprint just an illusion? Maybe the real key lies in constant adaptation, deep local understanding, and perpetual willingness to learn, experiment, and evolve based on context.
That's something to ponder.
We really encourage you to reflect on these ideas. Maybe look at your own community, your own country, through this lens. Think about how individual actions, collective efforts, guided by these kinds of insights, can contribute to building a more informed, a more equitable, and ultimately a more developed world for everyone. Thanks for diving deep with us today.